Hey, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Shavuos Daf Mem Aleph. Thanks for your patience and me not being here. I don't know if you cared, but I wasn't here. And a special thank you to Ruvain Handler for just being a steadfast partner in teaching Daf Yomi. I'm very appreciative. We're starting at the bottom of Mem Amud Beis at the two dots, 10 lines from the bottom. Monali biyadcha. If I make a claim to you that you owe me 100, and you respond, Ein lecha biyadi, and you say, I don't owe you anything, seemingly a simple transaction. So the halacha is pater. Our Mishnah says that you're pater, and what we'll soon see is that you're pater mida oraisa. Here's what Rav Nachman adds. Amar Rav Nachman umashbian oso shvuas heses. While it's true that you're pater, but you still are obligated to make a shvuas heses, which is a shvua derabanan that verifies your claim. You, the defendant, to say that ein lecha biyadi. My taima. What is the reason why the Chachamim instituted a shvuas heses in this case? So the Gemara says because chazaka ein adam tovea ela im ken yesh lo alav. It doesn't make sense mitzad the tovea to just pashat lie. Now, I don't know what their culture was like. I think these things are very common nowadays, and maybe the world is just a different place. But maybe not. Look what the Gemara says, Adarabba, the exact opposite. It's not that we don't believe the Tovea. We should have argued, Chazaka ein adam meiz panav bifnei balchovo. We should have argued that really we shouldn't need even a Shua Sesas, even a Shua Derabanan, because Chutzpah Noira, what kind of person are you that if you really owe somebody money, you say, no, I don't. That's another level of a mindset. It's not normal. So says the Gemara, let's thread the needle. Why do we need a Shavuos Heses? Because ishtamutehu to come mishtamile. We assume that he is trying to slip away, meaning he's trying to kick the can down the road. Right now, I don't have money. I'll get my paycheck in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, I'm going to tell him I don't owe him anything. I'll pay him when I get my money. And savar ad havali uparanale. When I get my paycheck, once I have some money, then I'll pay him. So says the Gemara, I could bring you a raya that this is the reason for the Shvuas Heses that Rav Nachman is talking about. Teda. Damar of Idi Bar Avin, Amar of Chizah. Look at these first few words here. HaKofer b'malve kosher le'edus. You're kofer b'malve. So if you're kofer b'malve, why would you be kosher le'edus? The reason you'd be kosher le'edus, says the Gemara, or the Rishonim explain, is because it's not really a lie. It's okay, you're kicking the can down the road. The words that came out of your mouth were a lie. But everyone knows. Everyone knows, like, nah, I don't owe you anything. And then a week later, you're like, okay, here's the money that I owe you. So that's what the Gemara is saying. The svara behind the Shvuas Heses is that we are afraid that a person would say that they don't owe anything when really what they mean is, I owe you, I just don't have any cash on hand. And let's just finish the line that Rav Chizah is quoting, Kofer b'malve would be kosher leidus, but bepikadon pas leidus.
This said only when our, I mean, if he's more than the mix-up, that's why he's in, when he's ishtamuti to come to Shavuos. But he said when it's
Not in our case. Our case was manali biyadcha, and he responded in the chabiyadi. And the Mishnah says you're pater midoraisa. That Rav Nachman adds you're chayiv midorabanan. Why do you have to make a shvuas heses? The answer is because we're afraid that he wasn't modeh b'mixas in this case. We're just afraid.
That's what I remember. One of two things that I don't know in detail, but like he don't. I mean, if he completely denies it, then he's
We're gonna
that's
get
kicking the can down the road.
we're gonna get to smecks of that in a little bit. We're gonna see a little bit of that in a moment. That's correct, but that doesn't seem to be this case. But very good. Yeah, that's really what's going on in the next couple of lines. So up until now, up until the words Rav Chaviva, up until that point, it seems to be that the reason why we have a Shavuos Heses is that we don't want the defendant to make a claim of kofer, that I don't owe you anything, in biyadi klum, only to really say what he means, which is, I'll pay you later. Now, Rav Chaviva looked at this din of Rav Nachman that you're still chayiv in a Shavuos Heses, and he says, Masni Asefa, actually, the din of Rav Nachman that you're chayiv Shavuos Heses is not on the Reisha where you're being kofer bakol, but rather it's on the Seifa. Manali biyadcha, this is the Seif of our Mishnah. So I'm the plaintiff. I say, Rabbi Sandberg, you owe me $100. Amar Lohain, he says, I do owe you. So you're maskim in this case. Then lemachar Amar Lo Tzneihuli. The next day I say, okay, Rabbi Yaakov, it's time to pay the bill. And then Yaakov says, no, nasati v'lecha. So what's the halacha? He says that you're pater. And on this, Rav Nachman says you're chayav shvuas heses. On this case, Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Nachman, umashbina shvuas heses. So there's two possible cases in which the din of Rav Nachman applies. Case number one is where I say to Yaakov, Manali biyadcha, and he says, Ein lecha biyadi. Rav Nachman says Shvuas Heses. And the second possibility is where I say Manali biyadcha, and you say Hein, but then you later are kofir. There we say you're pater, and Rav Nachman says Shvuas Heses. Now the cases are not the same. One is a total kvira, one is a total admittance. So let's see. How do we learn this? Man de masne aresha kol shekin asefa. The one who says you're chayav Shvuas Heses when you're kofir bakol, all the more so we'd say you're chayav Shvuas Heses when it is modeh b'mixas, or really modeh in its entirety. Uman demasne la'asefa, top of mem aleph amud aleph. According to the second approach, that Rav Nachman only has a shvuas heses where Yaakov, the defendant, said, "Hein, that yes, Phil, I owe you money." Hachahu deika drara demamona. There we would say that there's a shvuas heses because at least it's shaykh to say that he paid a little, right? He's agreeing to the interaction, but aval hasam in the reish of the Mishnah, where Yaakov the defendant says he was categorical, I don't owe you anything, delekadror demamona lo, perhaps there we wouldn't require a shvuas heses. So two different approaches. That's a little bit what you were saying, right? We have this case where it's like a little bit in the middle, where you said hein, and then you said, but I already paid you. That's in the middle. That's drara demamona. Now we're in the hak about whether or not money was paid. In the first case, you shut the whole thing down. No, in the chabiyadi. Nothing. Machlokas, where we have the din of Rav Nachman, but just to review more broadly, is that yes, it's true the Mishnah says you're pater mid'oraisa from shvua in many cases, but it could well be that there's a shvuas heses, which is a shvua derabanan, in which case one would be chayiv. And now really broadening this conversation and taking it to 30,000 feet, because that was really in the weeds, really we have a bit of a different question here, and that is, my ika ben shvua de'oraisa l'shvua derabanan. We had said in our Mishnah that you're pater from a shvua d'oraisa, and Rav Nachman added, potentially in the Reish and potentially in the Seifa, that you're chayv shvua seses a shvua d'rabanan. So asks the Gemara, my nafkamina between the two shvuos, halachically, what's the difference? Okay, one's midoraisa, one's midrabanan. What is the difference between a shvua that the Torah says you're required to say, and what is the difference between the Rav Nachman dika shvua that the Chachamim say, Chazal say you're obligated to say the shvua? So we'll see a few different versions here. Answer number one, Ika beinahu meipach shvua, is in regards to switching who says the shvua. Bida oraisa, when we're talking about a shvua that the Torah is mechayev a person to say, lo mafchinan, shvua. There we say that you're not allowed to kick the shvua to another person. But bidrabanan, when we're dealing with a shvuas heses, so then mafchina, then we do allow another person to say. So for example, I can say to Rabbi Yaakov, please make a shvua. He can say, I'd rather you make the shvua. That's only true by dinei derabanan. By shvuos derabanan, it's not true by shvuos deoraisa. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second. But according to Mar Bar Ravashi, who holds that both midoraisa and midorabanan in both cases were mafchinan shua, that really Yaakov can make the shua or I can make the shua, doesn't matter. So according to him, answer number one doesn't work. We wanted to say that the nafkamina between a shua deoraisa and a shua derabanan is mepach shua. But according to Mar Bar Ravashi, there is no difference in that regard. He says that in both cases, by a shvua d'oraisa and a shvua d'rabanan, that we are mafchinan. So according to him, my ika bein d'oraisa l'd'rabanan. Then what's the difference? L'maisa, that's not enough kamina if they hold the same thing in both cases. So according to Mar Bar Ravashi, and any of his cohorts, anyone who agrees with him, ika beinaihu mechas l'nechse. Would we then go into your property to take what you thought was yours, but you're not making a shvua now? Bide oraisa, when we're dealing with a shvua de oraisa, if a person turns down making that shvua, then nachtina lenechse, then we can go into his property. His omission is his guilt. But b'derabanan, if the only shvua that we're talking about is a rabbinic, chazal-oriented, chazal-driven shvua, shvuas heses, then lo nachtinan lenechse. The chachamim's shvua If Rabbi Yaakov denies making the shvuah, he says, I'm not making a shvuah here. I refuse. So yes, there's a remez. It's like shtika kilda a little bit. It's true there's a bit of a remez of guilt, but by a din derabanan, by shvuah derabanan, we don't allow to effectively take a lien on a property and then capture whatever's in discussion. So this is answer number 2. Answer number 1 works according to some, which is mepach b'shvua. Answer number 2, which seemingly as of now works according to all, is mechas l'nichse, is that perhaps that's a difference between a shvua d'orais and a shvua d'rabbanan. But says the Gemara, not so simple. Will the Rabbi Yossi da'amar b'd'rabbanan nami nachtin l'nichse? Rabbi Yossi has a very unique shita that even in regards to a shvua d'rabbanan, the Chachamim instituted the Shavuos Heses, and Yaakov didn't want to make the Shavuah, okay? But he holds that you can still be Nachtina L'Nichse, you can still go in and take what is now halachically rightfully yours. Where do we see that Rabbi Yossi holds this? In a place out of left field, one that we've learned about a number of times in Shas. Ditnan. Mitzias Chereshot V'Katan. Says the Gemara, what if a Chereshot V'Katan picks up a lost item? Picks up a diamond, picks up $100 bill, whatever the case may be. So the problem is that they have no das. So if they have no das, they can't make a kinyan. They can't make a kinyan, then the item that's in their possession is hefker mamish. They have no das. So it says the Mishnah over there, Metzias cher shot v'katan yesh bam gezel, but only mipnei darkei shalom. We treat it as though, right? We treat it as though there is some degree of gezel, but it's not gezel deoraisa. It's seemingly not even gezel derabbanon. Darkei shalom is pasnished. Don't do that. It's not. You're stealing. It's keilu, like you're stealing from a child. Like I guess literally, you're stealing from a child. Again, maybe that's where the phrase comes from. You can't do that. They have no das. They're katan. They're not a bar hachi. They're not a bar chiyuva. Whatever the case. It's not appropriate. Now, this is the Rabbi Yossi that we need, because a couple of lines ago, we said that Rabbi Yossi can't accept nafkamina number 2 of mechas lenichse, because Rabbi Yossi himself holds that even by a Shavuos Heses, which is derabanan, that nachtina lenichse, that the Chachamim would say that if the defendant won't make the Shavuah, that we can go into his property and take what the plaintiff claims. So let's see his shita where we see this from. Rabbi Yossi Omer, we're about a quarter of the way down on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Gezel Gomor. He holds that if one were to take a mitzia, if one were to take a lost object that was picked up by a chereshot of a katan, it's gezel gamor. Now, obviously, it's not gezel gamor midoraisa because they still have no das. So therefore, Rav Chizda teaches on the sheet of Rav Yossi, and he says, "V'amar Rav Chizda, gezel gamor midivreihem." Now, l'may nafkamina. What is the difference between the Tanakama, who holds that chereshot v'katin yesh b'm gezel mipnei darkei shalom, and Rabbi Yossi, who says it's gezel gamor midivreihem? Darkei shalom versus gezel midivreihem. Says the Gemara, lehotzio b'dayanin, that according to Rabbi Yossi holds that you can use a dayan to extract that which the chereshot of a katan picked up. We learned about this in the previous Masech, that we're not going to dig in. The point of this Mari Makom is to show us that Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that if a person makes a Shavuos Heses, a Shavuah derabanan, so the halacha is that Bezdin will still be Nachtina L'Nichse. So therefore, Nafkamina number 2 does not work anymore. And Hadra Kusha L'Duchta, we're back to where we are, Mai Ika Bein Doraisa L'Derabanan. At least according to the Shita Rabbi Yossi, we don't yet have a viable nafkamina between a Shvuah D'Orais and a Shvuah D'Rabbanan. So let's try again. Ika Beinai, who says the Gemara, the nafkamina between a Shvuah D'Orais and a Shvuah D'Rabbanan is where one of the people involved is Chashid al HaShvuah. So let's say with me and Yaakov, that Yaakov's Chashid al HaShvuah. He has a track record for lying, and everybody knows it. Bezdin knows it. I know it. He even knows it because he's the liar. So says the Gemara, the person who I'm in court with, the guy opposite me, Yaakov, that he is chashid al hashvua. I don't think you're chashid al hashvua. It's just a mashal. So says the Gemara, bide oraisa, when we're dealing with a shvua mida oraisa, shekenegdo chashid al shvua, if the person who's in court with me, Yaakov, is chashid al shvua, avchinan le shvua v'samu a'idach, then the other person involved, he will then have to make the shvua. So that only works midoraisa. So I'm in court with you. You're not trustworthy. So Bezdin says, fine, Phil, you make a shvua that in fact he owes you, and then they'll trust me. What shvua would you have made? I don't owe Phil. But he can't. He's chashid ala shvua. So then midoraisa, we flip the capacity to say the shvua to another yid. That's going to be me. But bidirabanan. But when we're dealing with a shvuas hesis, that's already takantahi. Making a shvuas hesis is itself a takana. The takanta le takanta lo avdina. A little gzera, but written takana le takana. It's actually interesting. I guess we've seen this phrase before. It says here on the side, but it's the inverse, I should say, of gzera le gzera, because gzera is negatives. It's don't do this and don't do that. Now you have double. And here it's takanta le takanta that we're saying that you can't first make a takana b'shvuas heses and then add on top of that when you connect those chashav b'shvua that we're afchinan. You can't do that. So far, so good. Ula Rabbanon, we're more than a third of the way down, and Mem Aleph Amar Aleph. Ula Rabbanon, according to the sheet of the Rabbanon, the Pligi Ale de Rabbi Yossi, they argue with Rabbi Yossi. What do they hold? The Amru, Bid Rabbanon lo nachtin lenechse. The Chachamim hold against Rabbi Yossi that if there is a din derabanan, a shvuas hesis, which is a shvua derabanan, and they hold, the Chachamim hold against Rabbi Yossi that you're not allowed to be nachtina l'nichsein. So then what slap on the wrist does he get? Like I'm asking Yaakov, make a shvua. The Chachamim say Yaakov has to make a shvua. Shvuas hesis, granted, shvua derabanan. He says no. What's the consequence? It's like that rule in parenting. Don't make a rule in your house that you're not willing to go all the way to and punish for if necessary. Otherwise, you're not serious about the rule. Go to bed. Or what? And the child's right. They'll play you like a fiddle. Here too, the Chachamim say we didn't institute a Shavuos Heses so that there's no consequence if you don't listen to us. So let's say Yaakov says, okay, I'm pater midaraisa. Reb Nachman says in the Gemara, Chai v'Shavuos Heses. Yeah, Reb Yaakov says, no, I'm not doing it. So Ma'avdinale. It says the Gemara Mishamtinale. He gets put into Cherem. He's excommunicated for not making a Shavuot, which is incredible. Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashi. And this is a very graphic phrase that we would have all assumed in our parlance is inappropriate. It's said b'lashon sagi nohor, but Rashi does not hold back at all. The Gemara says, hi, this case scenario of putting someone into an excommunication benidui for not making a shvua, nakte bekovse, you're basically grabbing him by his private parts. The nivshike leglimehu. You're forcing him to say he owes money because you're not taking him out of. What you did is you put him in nidui in perpetuity until he says, I'm guilty. What kind of scenario is that? Rashi calls this out 12 lines down. Nakte lekovse de l'shav. Ochzo beveitzav hatuluyim bo ad sheyitin lo talis shalav. He agreed. So again, I'm surprised. This is not our lashon, but that's what the Gemara says. That Ravina says this to Rav Ashi. In other words, you're creating a scenario where he's going to admit to his guilt that he isn't. He may not even be guilty. But what you've left him no choice. The guy is now bishamta. He gets no aliyah. No one's inviting him for Shabbos meal. Nothing. He's done. He's not a chazan. He's out. So he says it's not fair. So Elahi disagrees. So what does Ravina say to Rav Ashi? Elamayav dinalei. What then is a more appropriate response if Yaakov doesn't want to say the Shavuos Heses that the Chachamim obligate him to say? Amarle, yes, mishamtinanle, but ademati zman and nagde, until the time comes for him to get malkos, which is 30 days, v'nagdinanle, and then v'shavkinanle. So he knows he can wait 30 days and he can get out of it. If he wants to get out earlier, he'll admit if he's guilty, but at least he has an avenue if he doesn't want to make the Shavuot. And he's potentially telling the truth that he can get out without being forced to actually say I'm guilty when I'm not. What? Well, it's makas mardus. It's makos derabanan because you're violating a rabbinic injunction, which is that you need to make a shua in this case. So if you violate what the Chachamim say, the Chachamim have the power to give makas mardus, to malkos derabanan. So we're not talking about, the way, I mean, it's given similarly, but makas mardus. Like getting out of it, getting off. I don't disagree with you, but what the difference between this solution and the previous one is that the previous one had no end time. Now we have a 30-day end time. So it's still not easy. No one wants to get lashes, but at least if you really feel that you're innocent, just wait 30 days. It's hard, but okay, very good. A little bit of a new sugya, 2/3 of the way down. Amar Rav Papa. Hi man, de apik shtara al chabre. I bring out a star that says that you, Eric, you owe me money. But Amar le, shtara paru. Eric says I paid already. Amrinan le, what is said? It was said to him, Lav kol kamina chazil shlim. Your claim is not good. You got to pay. V'im Omar. However, if Eric says back to me, if the lova says to the malve lishtabali, Phil, promise me that I owe you money. So amrinan le ishtabale. So then the halacha is that I have to make a shavua in order to prove that I'm not lying about Eric owing me money. And this is a shavua derabanan. It's a shavua hesses as well. Omar le Rav Acha b'rei de Rava le Rav Ashi. Rav Acha says to Rav Ashi, I hear you, but umay bein zeh lepogem es shtaro. What would be the difference between the case that I just articulated between me and Eric, where I say, Eric, you owe me money. He says, no, I don't. And then he says, Phil, make a promise. Between that and the case of pogem eshtaro. The case of pogem eshtaro, Rashi highlights the case at some length, is a case where a woman is owed money and the husband only paid part, and she was modeh that the husband paid part. She was pogem eshtaro. She detracted from her ksuba by saying, I know you really owed me 200, but today's balance is 100. You already paid me some. So these cases they don't actually sound very similar, but the Gemara wants to know what's the difference. Amar Le, the Gemara says that Hasam, in regards to her case, where she admitted that part of her ksuba was paid already, then afal gav de lo tainihu ta'aninan le'anon. We are going to say on his behalf that there needs to be a shavua for the rest. But hacha, in our case, amrinan le zil shlimle, that he does in fact have to pay. But if Eric says v'itain v'amar ishtabali, amrinan le zil ishtabale, the cases are not the same. Why are the cases not the same? It should be obvious. The first case was categorical, where Eric said, I don't owe you anything. And the second case where she said, you already paid me half. Not comparable cases. And here the Gemara says a comment that requires understanding. If the person in discussion is a Talmud Chacham, lo mashpe'inan lei. If I were the Talmud Chacham, Eric can't be mashpi'a me. He can't force me to say a shavua because I'm erlich. It's very interesting. It's beautiful. Halavai. But the assumption of the Gemara is that if you're a Talmud Chacham, there's nothing leaves your lips that isn't like it should be. The problem with this is that if me not making the shvua because I'm such a Talmud Chacham is real, the Yitzur b'mei Rabbananhu, 8 lines from the bottom, Lo mashbi Amar le Rav Yemar, excuse me, Amar le Rav Yemar le Rav Ashi, Yitzur b'mei Rabbanan mishlach glima de inshi. What does that mean? His lack of promise will create for an inequity of whether or not an item returns? Just because he's a servant Rabbanan, if I make a shvua and if I don't make a shvua, but the fact that I'm a Talmud Chacham and I therefore you're not gonna question whether or not I told the truth, so therefore he has to pay me? That's crazy. That means I can take the shirt off of Eric's back without even making a shvua. Ella, that can't be. Says the Gemara, no, lo. When we are dealing with a Talmud Chacham, so lo mizdakekinan le ledine, that when a Rav says that people owe him money, we basically recuse ourselves from the case, and the Rav ends up not collecting. Because we don't want to, on the one hand, we don't want him to make a shvua pasnish that a Rav should make a shvua. And at the same time, he's not admitting. He's not saying innocent or guilty. He's saying he's owed money, so it's an unfortunate scenario. He can make a shvua if he wants. We're just not machayiv him. It's not. So there's like kind of a reading between the lines. We won't force you to make a shvua. You're a Talmud Chacham. But if he says, I'm happy to make a shvua, then he'll get his money. But if he chooses not to, the money stays where it is. Okay, next sugya, 5 lines from the bottom. Last of the short lines on Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph. We are going to be learning about a little bit more than halfway down to the last of the short lines, actually to the first of the long lines on Mem Aleph Amud Beis, and Mir Hashem we'll learn a lot more tomorrow night. So says the Gemara, Manali Biarcha. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi, Hamalve eschavero be'edim. If when the loan took place, when I handed you the money, I brought Reuven and Shimon to be edim for me handing you the money, so then tzarich leporo be'edim. So then the love, when he pays the malva back, it also has to be on level footing with edim. So I'm going to make a loan to you, Gerald. I'm going to give you money, but I've brought two Jews to be edim. Good. But then when you pay me back, we need edim also. So the Gemara says. Now, this is version 1. We'll see the exact opposite in a couple of minutes. Ki amrisa kame de Shmuel. When this line of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Ravasi, excuse me, was said in front of Shmuel, Amar Li, I disagree with you. We don't need edim. Why? What did he say? Amar Li, Yachol Lomar Lo. No, you can say to him, the Lova can say, Praticha bifnei ploni uploni, v'halchu lehem lemedinas hayam. And because he could make that claim, this part is not said in the Gemara, but it is found in the Rishonim. Therefore, because he could make that claim, he also could not have Edim, because that claim seemingly doesn't have Edim involved. So he seems to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda Maravasi. That's appropriate. They're both Amoraim. They actually lived right near each other in time, because Rabbi Yehuda was a Talmud of Shmuel. And Rabbi Yehuda was talking in the name of Ravasi. Rabbi Yehuda was very unique. He learned in a lot of Batei Medrash, but he was actually older than the author of this line. So they all lived at the same time, and Shmuel did not agree. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Manali biyadcha. We have a Mishnah that says that if I say, I make a taina that you owe me 100, Amar Lohain, you, the defendant, taina, yes, I do. Lamachar, I come to collect. Amar Lo, Tnehuli. It's time for you to pay me. And then the defendant says, the Lova says, Nasati Vlach, I already paid you. So we learned this already. We said that you're putter in such a case, midoraisa. But v'hahacha, in our case, kevan detave be'edim, since I claimed in front of Edim, that was our case, right? We said, Amal b'eschaver ben tzarchel por be'edim. If I'm tovea you in front of Edim, keman de'oz fe be'edim dami. It's similar. It's not the same, but if I claim in front of Edim, I bring Ruvain and Shimon and I say, Stan, you owe me money. So then it's as though you loaned me the money with that, Biktani Pater, and nevertheless it says you're Pater. That is a kasha, as the Gemara says, to Yufta de Ravasi. Ravasi wanted to say that if the loan was done in front of two, then the payment of the loan has to be done in front of two. And the Mishnah here is, this is a jump. I'm asking it's a jump. But the Mishnah on the bottom of the page said that if I'm claiming that you should pay me in front of Edim, it's similar to having lent you the money with Edim, which is a jump. It requires, we need some integrity for that, but that's what the Gemara says. So this is a tiyuf de Ravasi. So Amar Lecha Ravasi, says the Gemara, no, I don't agree to what you just asserted. You asserted that if I claim in front of Edim that you owe me money, not that I lent you in front of me, but I claim in front of Reuven and Shimon, by the way, Reuven and Shimon, Stan owes me $100. So this is the distinction that Ravasi now makes. Amar Lach Ravasi, Ana ki amre, when I said what I said, which is that if a loan is done in front of Edim, the payment has to be in front of Edim, that's Heichad Meikara Osfe Be'edim. That's mamish the loan. It has to be that the loan was done. The lo lididei hemne, hacha hahemne. The reason I had Edim in the beginning is because I don't trust you as far as I can throw you. So I brought Edim to be mechayev you. But hacha, over here, and over here means in the Tanan, in the Mishnah that was quoted on the second line from the bottom, there, our conversation was done privately. So therefore, it shows that there was some trust. So therefore, no raya from there, no kasha on the sheet of Ravasi. So let's just review. Ravasi was of the opinion that if a loan was done in front of Edim, I'm going to loan my father money with two Edim. Then, when my father pays me back, then there have to be Edim. That's what Ravasi holds. Now, Rav Yosef learns the exact opposite. Says the Gemara as follows. Rav Yosef masni hachi. He says the din of Ravasi was not that way. Rav Yosef was the generation after Shmuel. So historically speaking, this conversation went on 3 generations in a row. Rav Yehuda was a very early Amora, learned under Rav and under Shmuel and under Ravasi. The next generation was Rav Asi himself, which means he gave the shiur. Shmuel was arguing he was that generation. Now the next generation is Rav Yosef. So this was like an ongoing conversation that happened for. Could you imagine? What do we have culturally that I talk about, that my father talks about, and that my grandfather talks about? Kimat velo. Our world is so different from one generation to the next, especially with technology. What are the commonalities that we talk about? Okay, family, we talk about those kinds of things. But what complex sugyas permeate every generation? Tzadik v'ralo, the major stuff, right? But here the Gemara says what they were handling was this case. And this was why we have a flipped version, says Rav Yosef, of Rav Asi. What's version 2 of Rav Asi? Fifth line, Hamalve es chavero be'edim. If I lend you money in front of Edim, eino tzarech leporo be'edim. No, just the loan was done in front of Edim. But the payment of the love back to the malve does not need to be done be'edim. The Omar, however, if the line that was said was al tifre'eni ela be'edim, if I add explicitly another clause to my claim with you, that I don't want you stand to pay me unless there are edim, tzarech lepora be'edim. So this is version 2. Here, let's see how Shmuel fits into this mix. Ki amrisa kamei de Shmuel. What would Shmuel say about this version of Rav Asi? Omar li, he said, Yachol lomar lo praticha bifnei ploni ufloni v'halach lehem lemedina sayam. I did pay you in front of Edim. They just left. Sorry, they left. There's no phones. They're on a country that has no technology. They're just unreachable, which shows you that even if I have a specific clause that says you must pay me be'edim, Shmuel says, don't worry about it. I could always argue that they're Medina Sayam. Easy peasy. Just get out of it. It's none. Let's see. Let's ask a question here. Says the Gemara. This is going to be a question on Shmuel. It's none. Manali biyadcha, the same Mishnah. You owe me $100. Amar lo hein, you say back to me, yes, Phil, I do. Amar lo, then I say to you, al titnehu li ela bifnei edim. I say, Stan, don't really trust you so much, so I want you to pay me only in front of edim. Lemachar amar lo tnehu li. The next day I say to Stan, pay up. Stan says, nosati v'loch, I already paid you. Chayiv. Stan still chayiv. Why? Mipnei shetach litein lo be'edim. Hi to you of the Shmuel. Shmuel just tried to tell me you don't need the Edim. Just pay the Edim whenever they are out of town. What does that mean? You have a Mishnah against you. You can argue with Rav Asi all you want, no problem. You want to argue with a Mishnah? That doesn't work. You're not Rav. Rav was Tana Upalik. You're not Rav. So Kasha and Shmuel. Amar Lach Shmuel will answer you as follows, quarter of the way down. You're right about our Mishnah that it doesn't stem with me. But don't worry, I have a Mari Makom. Tanoihi. This is actually a machlokes tanim. The first shita is not like Shmuel. The first shita is like our Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, the second shita is like his. Titania. Be'edim hilvi sicha. I lent you money with edim. Be'edim parali. And with edim you have to pay me back. Or, o yitain, either if that's what I ask you to do, then, o yitain, pay up. Oh, yavi raya shenosan. Find a way to prove to me that you actually gave me money. You know, they have this in banks where if you take out cash, they put the cash out in front of them and they count one bill. There's a camera literally watching that transaction to make sure every bill is matched. Every bill. Same thing in the slots. Not that I've been, but the same thing in the slots. When they pay, I've actually only been once, actually. I don't have much of a desire for it. But anyways, it's totally not the point. The point is that you have to bring a raya. Aval, says the no. I'm way too low here. Okay, so that's the Tanakama. The Tanakama agrees that, again, Edim or a raya. Let's see where Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, Omer, Yachalomar lo praticha bifnei ploni uploni b'halach lehem lemedina sayam. But it's the same exact words, which means Shmuel has a perfectly valid response and a perfectly valid shita against Rav Asi and against our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is subject to a machlokas with another Mishnah. Parich Rav Acha, or possibly Rav Achai. And he's asking against Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who said we don't really need Edim. Mimai de b'shas halvakoi. How do you know that we're talking about a case that there were Edim b'shas halva? Dilma, perhaps the case we're talking about is b'shas tviyakoi, that there were no Edim at the loan time. There was Eidim at the claim time, which is totally different. Stan and I had a private transaction. Nobody was around dark alley. Here's $100. But when I want to get paid, I know who I'm dealing with. Stan, meet Ruvain and Shimon. Stan, you owe me money. Totally different ballgame. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is saying you don't need Eidim when the Eidim were not present at the halva, but only at the Tviyah. That makes a lot more sense. So says the Gemara, and what would be the iteration of this, the storyline? Lav be'edim hilvisicha. I didn't loan to you money with. Did I not loan you money with edim? And be'edim hayalacha leporani. You should have paid me with. You should have paid me with edim. Aval b'shas halva divya kol chayiv. But if at the time of the loan, when I met with Stan to lend him the money, Reuven and Shimon, I brought them along to be my guarantors, at least halachic. I don't mean financially, but they were the witnesses, they aid them to what I did. Maybe everyone agrees that you're chayiv in such a case. How do we paskin? Okay, we have two cases. We have version number one of Ravasi, that if a loan is done be'edim, the poreya has to be done be'edim, the lov has to pay be'edim. We have version number two of Ravasi, that if a loan was done be'edim, you don't need edim. How do we paskin? Believe it or not, it's a machlokes. And from two people who have very similar names, about 6 lines before the wide lines, and then we'll stop after explaining this machlokes. Amar of Papi, Mishmei de Rava, Hilchasa, what's the halacha? Hamalves chavero be'edim, tzarech lepora be'edim. Which version is this? This is version number 1. This is what we saw at the beginning of the Gemara on the bottom of Mem Aleph Amar Aleph. The Rav Papa Mishmei de Rava Amar, Papa and Papi, not the same people, but both Talmidim of Rava. Amar, Hamalve es chaver be'edim ein tzarech lepora be'edim, v'im Amar lo al tifreni bel be'edim, tzarech lepora be'edim. So that's what we saw earlier. This is version number 2. V'im Amar lach, praticha bifnei ploni uploni v'halchu lahem lemedinas hayam, and if, like Shmuel, if the claim is that there are other people out there, but they went to Medinas Hayam, then ne'eman. Ne'eman is a unique word. It wasn't the word we were using before, but that is what the Gemara says. So we seem to have a machlokes still in regards to how we paskin. I'm not sure we could make the yukim about what the Rambam would hold necessarily, because there's no quote of the Rambam on Rav Papi or Rav Papa, though earlier in the sugya there are Rambams that are quoted, so an unknown for now. We'll start tomorrow at the Siman, the end of that very first of the long lines on Mamalaf Amud Beis, and try to cover some significant ground. Wishing you all a beautiful night. What?
Note on the word.